Through more than 2 decades at Kenner and Hasbro, Aaron built worlds, told stories, and designed toys for some of pop culture's biggest names, including Transformers, Batman, Star Wars, and more. Join him as he explores the archives and tells you the stories of the creative process behind your favorite toys. This is the Toy Armada with your host, Aaron Archer.
So we are back again with another Toy Armada with your host, Aaron Archer, and I'm also here too, Protoman, holding the things together. And we're going to be doing yet again another deep dive into some specific Transformers Energon product. We are going into 2025, and these are 2 items that actually kind of swung around in 2005. So we're going on the 20th anniversary of these items here too, in the Transformers Energon line. But first, Aaron, how you doing?
I'm great today.
Awesome stuff. So the 2 that we're going to be covering today with Aaron is we're going to be covering the Energon Kicker and High Wire. These were voted by the fans quite a few weeks ago during one of Aaron's live streams of stuff that they wanted to hear about the development of stuff. And the other one we're going to be covering is that of the Alpha Quintesson, which was a very bizarre piece in Transformers history and also has a lot of like firsts in a lot of ways in terms of what happened with Transformers mainline. So the first one we're going to dive into, like we said, is the Energon Kicker with High Wire. This was part of the Combat class price point, which is what we pretty much call a Deluxe. It's just Energon had weird naming conventions with their price points back then. It came out around the super late end of Q4 2024, but really started, showing up in Q1 of 2025. It was an Eric Siebeneller design, and it was a kicker figure that was pretty much almost a G.I. Joe figure. It was a 3 3/4. It had that similar G.I. Joe articulation. It had an O-ring holding it all together like a G.I. Joe figure. And in a lot of ways, it was kind of America's version of what Japan just got the year prior, where Superlink, aka what Energon was in Japan, got their version of Kicker in their version of what was, I guess, G.I. Joe through their Microman line. And now we have our version. Has slightly less paint, not as fragile as the Japanese version, and came with what would be an interesting first. It came with High Wire, which was a motorcycle transformer that could transform and he could ride it like in the show, but it technically was an oversized minicon in a lot of ways. So Aaron, what could you tell me about this figure? Development, ideas, everything like that, before we get deeper into it.
Yeah, so this era of Transformers Unicron Trilogy, we were always trying to expand the concept of what kind of products we could make. Clearly, you see that with some role play at different times, Laserbeak and the sword and different things. And this idea of action figures, having the human figures be impactful enough in the programming that they could also become action figures, which are something else Hasbro could promote, was always in there as well. So this is kind of like our both these items we'll talk about today have this extra kind of concept added onto them. So this is Hasbro's attempt to add action figures into the Transformer line. Our belief was that transforming alone wasn't enough in a way. We're always looking for ways to expand the power of Transformers into new spaces. So that's kind of what this was. And Kicker had the partner of High Wire in the show a little bit. And so we just took that opportunity to just kind of make the bigger version of the minicon that he could ride on and just offer a different kind of toy. I helped create the costume with Takara for the show. And then, of course, they, made theirs the Microman version. Mm-hmm. And, sorry, I still say Microman.
I was about to say, I love
that's just how I heard it from the Japanese so many times. It's Microman to me.
Microman.
And what that format did not allow Hasbro really to sell at a price point that made sense for the rest of the world. So we abandoned looking at that item as a opportunity for the Western market, so to speak, and had to come up with something else for our market. And at the time, we were making the Venom versus Valor, or that
is 100%
era
correct.
Yeah, that era of G.I. Joe. So I believe the decision was made to create this in the G.I. Joe vernacular. So this is one of the few figures in the Transformer lines that was probably sculpted at Hasbro, Rhode Island, as a standard action figure. Probably did not. We probably sent that figure to Takara to then mold, because I think the molding is still with Takara. Hasbro can't redeco this independently, I don't believe, at the moment.
Well, interestingly enough, in terms of like firsts with this, so if you look at up to that point with Energon, when you talk about like Transformer toys having their human elements in any way, outside of like the stretch of, well, a Headmaster is that human character, or the Target Master was a human character in an armor that transformed into the head or a gun, we never really had human figures. It just didn't exist. And I guess because Kicker was such a large active element, I guess, action-wise in the show, where, in the past, yeah, Spike was there and the human characters were there, but they never really engaged too much in the robot-to-robot action, and there was just no reason to have those figures exist. It's very different today. Now we have human figures of all kinds of characters. But back then, Kicker really was like the first, and I think it was primarily because just, he had that big Star Saber sword, and he was cutting down, Terracons and stuff. So
his purpose in the show was to be a little more active, a little more armored up. Obviously, could go to combat with the robots, because obviously the other classic stories where there's just kids in peril all the time,
or on the side at
using
best.
their wits or maybe a piece of technology, but not really actively participating in the battle as it is. And Kicker was an effort to try to do better with that.
And again, the choice to go with something that's a much more standardized G.I. Joe, like you mentioned, around that time, the Venom versus Valor line was what was kicking around at Hasbro. They just had finished the Cobra G.I. Joe versus Cobra relaunch, I believe you guys were doing, like that whole new look and style. I know Steve Bono, I believe, was working on it at the time. But yeah, so it's something where, you went with that kind of styling, the O-ring, which again is very G.I. Joe. So really cementing that this is like a G.I. Joe product. Had the G.I. Joe articulation. It's a G.I. Joe figure.
Yeah, well, at the time, they would have had the basic figure buck.
Yeah, the buck, exactly.
Of the articulated G.I. Joe figure at that time. And then they would just added on these armor details onto the thighs, shins, shoulders, and made that the kind of backpack thing, and sculpted a head, and away they went, as if it was just another G.I. Joe sculpt. And that was the most... we did not need to reinvent the wheel. We understood the costing of such an item, and that's exactly why we went that direction.
And again, the choice to include a transforming element with him, because like again, the Microman one, as you were referring to, was a standalone product initially. It was it would be in a 2-pack later on, but in its initial release, it was a standalone product. It was just the Kicker figure with a sword. G.I. Joe products historically have been the standalone figure with accessories. The choice to really make it fit into that deluxe price point assortment and include something extra, was it just more because, well, we don't want to have to make a new price point for this, because while that price point exists in G.I. Joe, it doesn't exist in our Transformer assortment. So we don't want to have to like ship this guy in a solid case of 8 alone, and then run the risk of it being like a peg worm or something. Have it be part of the deluxe combat assortment, and then we'll just include something in it that justifies the price, that extra, which would be the high wire.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to keep it in that deluxe or whatever it was called price point.
Combat,
that right under $10, I believe, and
$9.99.
And that was something we definitely wanted to do, because after Laserbeak and Armada with like this weird middle price point, it just didn't work out. The package scale couldn't change that dramatically, and whatever. So we definitely didn't want to add price points in just for special items. So it had to fit within the matrix as it existed, and so we made a pretty straightforward Transformer out of that bike. It is not overly articulated or under-articulated, but it's kind of different because of the nature of the costing going into the figure. But fun that he could ride on it, and then you could replicate that aspects of the show with him being active.
And again, it's the first oversized minicon in a sense. It's like minicons have always been that kind of very tiny, Micromaster-esque kind of price point, and then here you have like a character that was a minicon, and now it's almost core class, whatever you would call it. Actually bigger than core class. I'd say like a scout class Transformer, so an oversized minicon. His in the case of Kicker, he had a spark crystal on his backpack, which again you could attach those Energon chips to continue that play pattern element. And again, he could be put on top of the motorcycle to reenact, again, what was going on in the show. The high wire figure itself also had the spark crystal gimmick instead, where again you could put an Energon chip on it. The spark crystal was where would have been his minicon port, so they kind of just as an upscaled version of that. The only negative that this figure suffered from that fans have had a problem with in the future is because it has that O-ring, and anyone who knows G.I. Joes. O-rings, because they're made out of rubber, they do decay over time. The reason why it's a big problem with Kicker is usually with G.I. Joes, if the O-ring falls apart, you go on Amazon, you buy yourself a whole bunch of O-ring bungs, you take a Phillips screwdriver to the back of your G.I. Joe, you replace that O-ring, and you're good to go for another 20 years. Kicker, unfortunately, because of that spark crystal being put on his backpack, it actually covers up the factory screw. And being able to access that screw involves kind of damaging the figure, because you have to, I don't know if it was glued on, I'm not sure about that.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So the spark crystal has to be physically removed from the back of the backpack, which could potentially damage it because it's a translucent plastic. And then you will have access to that Phillips screw, which then you could open them up and change the O-ring. So keep that in mind when buying a Kicker from Energon. He might be a little cruddy in that O-ring, so he might break in half. So it's they had the same problem with Zartan from G.I. Joe. He had a similar issue where his O-ring his O-ring screw wasn't accessible.
So over time, those O-rings essentially dry out. The oils in them that make them stretchy and pliable, so that you can do all that fun articulation, dries out. And then when that dries out, it causes shears in said plastic then, and that's the end of those.
Yeah, so that's all. That's that. Now, like you mentioned, Takara probably has the tooling for this because this figure had never been repainted afterwards. So
yeah, I'm actually sitting here looking at it, and I'm wondering if this one is also Hasbro developed. Hard for me to remember if we did this whole item and then transferred it to Takara like as a bundle, or if they did the bike and we did the figure.
Well, it is something where this item, both the bike and the figure, have only been released in the Western market. Again, Japan had their Microman version, so they didn't need to have an extra item on the shelf. They already had something that kind of conveyed and did that character in multiple ways. So this is something that was just released over here and never got a repaint afterwards, not even like a store exclusive or whatever. So I guess like you said, the location of the tooling might still be with them, if anything. And they've never done anything with it since, which is a shame. Would have been cool maybe, years later do something. We're celebrating an anniversary of Energon. Maybe they could dig up that old tooling and put it in something, in a Hasbro Pulse exclusive or whatever. But yeah, so it was a weird one. Again, Eric Siebeneller did the designs. Aaron worked on the original suit of Kicker, so you also have kind of a little bit of DNA with the design of this figure too. And yeah, very cool little one there. And again, that came out in like early 20 early 2005. That one, very bizarre one. Next one we're going to be jumping into is that of the Alpha Quintesson. So this is, again, also another item that was uniquely released in the West, only in the West. According to what we have here from reports, it was shipped out in February of 2005. It shipped in case assortments along with the Mega Class 6-shot. This was a Mega Class price point. That Mega Class 6-shot was that weirder color repaint of the Shock Blast Shockwave character. The Mega Class price point was the $19.99 price point. We have here, in terms of designers, Marcelo did the packaging art, but we don't have a designer associated with this. I don't know if you have any knowledge to add to that.
Yeah, I believe Brian Parrish worked on this one.
Good to know. We could add that to the wiki.
I think I obviously had some strong input. I don't remember if I actually did any kind of pre-sketching or not for Brian. And or maybe there are Don images out there. I might have had Don draw something up at one point as a starting base. So, where do you want to start with this one?
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on here with this guy. First up, right out of the bat, he is the first, up to that point, the very first mainline Transformer toy that didn't have any transformation elements on him. Like, even if you go all the way back to like the much lauded, Action Masters, while those didn't transform, their weapons did, So there was, when Transformers was on the shelves, even though something didn't transform on it, other things still did. The transforming element was still part of the product. This was the very first time a mainline Transformer product didn't have any transforming elements on it. So that was that first unique thing about him. Even the Kicker that we just talked about before, while Kicker didn't transform, and he technically would have been like the focus of that product, his high wire did. So
you don't count the rotating heads as transforming?
Well, that's where it's about as close as it could probably get if you want to stretch it. Yeah. If anything,
I think I may have sold it in with that stretch.
Maybe that was probably the play feature. Yeah. So again, because it was the first one that didn't have a transformation really, but I think that, again, it's pretty much agreed. The main reason why, much like Kicker, that this guy got a product was because of how much he was featured in the show, very predominantly, almost like in a secondary big bad character,
Yeah.
Like not Megatron, but like a secondary antagonist, and features a bunch of gimmicks, which I'm pretty sure we'll let you take care of that, and I'll cover any bases you don't. But what about with everything going on here?
Yeah, so couple different things happening here, obviously. At the end of Armada, Unicron was destroyed, theoretically. So we felt like we did need another sort of bad guy, and we knew we'd probably bring Unicron back somehow. But so we needed this middle section. I've talked in the past about how at this point, I've probably gone to a couple of bot cons. I'm probably somewhat checking boards and just getting vibes. And so things like these classic characters like the Quintessons were a good place to start as far as inspiration. Not so much their backstory that I wouldn't have known about, but just things that exist that could be pulled.
A familiar visual for the fans.
Yeah. And so a familiar visual for the fans, and maybe a word like the Quintessons.
Yeah, and a name, yeah.
And this was an item that was also a test type of item for Hasbro to develop items for the Transformers brand that didn't have to go through Takara. And that is why it probably does not have transformation as you traditionally think of it, because that means they would have had to do it. We were very much at this point already starting to maximize the Takara design team and engineering team, and with the amount of products that were coming through the system and successful, and we were adding segments alongside this. So we were at different points along the way looking to gameplay, so to speak. Okay, well, what happens if we have to develop product, or can we develop our own product? How would we develop our own product? And this character came out of some of those asks and needs. So it's in the show for its villain reason. It's inspiration from the past to make a connection and play off the Unicron aspects of things. And then it's a simple play feature, just a lot of different play features, to your point, to make it a compelling item that Hasbro can just manufacture on its own. That in a nutshell is the best way to say it. I named it Alpha Quintesson. At one point, we were calling it Alpha Q. I think it's referenced as Alpha Q a few different times. I thought that was cool because Quintesson is a mouthful, but I woke up in a cold sweat one day when I said it really slow. Alpha Q does not belong in a television show targeting to kids.
I never made that connection.
Yeah.
Until you said it.
Yeah. So I had a scary moment where we had been calling it this thing and no one said anything.
And that's what it's called in Japan, by the way. There's no Alpha Quintesson. It's Alpha Q over there.
Yeah. But so that was a worry at one point. And we started using Alpha Quintesson a lot as a result of that. Because if you say it too fast or too slow, you might be in for a confusion. And we just probably toy-wise just threw everything in, bendy wire and rolling stuff and articulated things and claws and a couple changing heads. I think it only has 3 heads, probably not the 5, right?
Yep.
For scale and easeability of the play. And that is largely what I recall.
Well, I'll go over so here's what this package of gimmicks really was. So it had the opening closing mouth of that big armor, which when you open the mouth would reveal all those Quintesson heads on the inside.
Oh, one thing I should add, it's like a Quintesson mixed with a Sharkticon, right? That's really what that big opening head is. It's a Sharkticon
that has like Quintesson inside it. Yeah. Okay.
So that's probably never been super clear, but that was the
intent of the design. Okay, cool. So you have like that Sharkticon-esque kind of armor. If you open it has an opening and closing mouth. If you open the mouth, inside is the Quintesson heads in there. And the figure, it plugs into a base, and like this base itself could be like rolled forward and back, and the wheels under it, when those wheels turned, it caused the tentacles to spin around, which created that kind of play element. Though there was 3 different tentacles, like you said, they were on wired posability, which up to that point I believe was never done before with Transformers. I was trying to think about. I was looking at my collection. I'm like, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Was there ever a Transformer that had a wired posable element? I don't think so. It's so something that wouldn't exist in our brand like up to that point with die cast and PVC plastics and stuff, or even ABS. So it had wired posable little tentacles. One of them had like a yellow clamp, a red chainsaw, like a purple energy arc thing. And again, very unique to it. The back of the head had this like sculpted fin that if you pushed back on it, that's where the heads would spin on the inside. And you had the angry head, the whiny head, and the crazy face. The one that is absent is that purple calm face that you see in the show. So technically, counting the closed mouth face, like the armor, which is the 4th one, according to the show, it's technically not a Quintesson. It's actually a Quadesson, I guess. In the show, he was indeed a Quintesson. He did have the 5 faces. Just the toy here is at best able to do just the 4. Also had a missile launcher that attached on his head, I guess just to have extra play for an action-based boy toy line, just to have it shoots a missile, so it could also engage and play with these other action toys of Transformers. The missile launcher is on a 5mm peg, so it's part of that universal weapon holding thing that you guys were doing with Energon and even a little bit before that with Armada. So you could block off that missile launcher and any figure could hold it, robot. So there's that too. It was marketed on its packaging as a Decepticon because it was either or back then. You either were one or the other, even though he kind of is his own third faction thing. So you guys just put him under the Decepticon stuff. And he was a super late release on the line, one of the harder ones to get because of how late he was shipped out, along with Six Shot and Overcast, which was the Jetfire repaint. And makes him pretty tough to find. His stand, apparently, some people, and I've yet to experience this, I've bought and sold a few of these, but it says that some people would get it in the box and it was missing the connector piece for the stand, making it impossible to stand at all, which was kind of a Yeah, I know. It's first I hear of this too. So I was like, that's interesting because I've sold like 3 of these and I've never had it without that issue. With that issue. So supposedly that was a problem. But yeah, very unique item. Again, just it's something that, once again, much like the Kicker, it exists more just because of how important that character is to the show, despite the fact of how unique it is and not Transformer-y it is. Like, same thing, like Kicker fits more into G.I. Joe, and this is such a kaiju-looking thing that, and when you look at all the gimmicks that you attach to, rolling forward and stuff moving around, and
It's a combination of all the things Kenner and Hasbro kind of just did on a basic level
years.
well. We could make firing projectiles in our sleep. Rolling wheels that turn gears to make things move was pretty straightforward as well. Now
that you mention, it's a very Kenner item. It is.
Yeah.
It's something that under a different sculpting would exist in a Batman toy line. Like if it was like a penguin that had spinning things and a missile launcher.
Well, we at this time, we knew kids. We still believed kids liked feature play, and again, Transformers can only have so much feature play, with so much of the play dominated with transformation as it is. And we'd hit critical mass with some of the combo stuff. We'd realized that Armada features could compromise different things. So we're always looking to how can we do what we do well in new ways and make sure it's available. And this figure, I call it a test. This one was a bit of a test. The Universe 2-pack with Grimlock and the swoop was a Hasbro test. So we were doing these throughout that era to just really, as we were expanding with Takara and co-development, what else can this line do? What can we do to help the line? What can we bring to the party? We don't have to throw everything over the wall for Takara to finish, and then we'll do these role play items. We'll do this big sword. And stuff like that. It was all part of the wider business plan. If to be in all honesty, you want to plan for success, and you have to also maintain a little bit of a what if kind of scenario. What if we get so successful Takara doesn't have any more capacity? Okay, are we just going to stop? No, probably not. So how would we start the development of other developers or partners? And we were always exploring and prodding those what ifs at different ways just to protect the enterprise. And this guy is an early push into those questions.
Well, what I see with both of them, especially because they're both the same kind of origin, where it's like you guys are going like, well, one day in the future, if we're like you said, if we're building for success, and this was the Brian Goldner, like, hey, we're starting Transformers over again, but we're going upward, right? And around this time too, maybe not during the development of this figure, but around this time we're also starting the early talks of a movie, and when that 2007 movie comes out, there is tons of product that is not Takara made from that, So
it was all building towards not only the Transformers brand and co-development with Takara, which we celebrate a lot with Armada and the Unicron trilogy, but it was also building the Transformers franchise for Hasbro's benefit. Not that Takara wouldn't benefit also, but like we were building our own thing, and these little things were all part of that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because by the time we get to movie 2007, you got the Robo replicas, you got the Gravity bots, you got like the Unleashed, if you want to even call that statuesque stuff. But there's so much stuff now. The plushes, yeah, the Softimus Prime. It's something where you guys go, you know what? We've already got our feet wet during Energon, kind of making our own stuff without having to constantly rely on Takara to put it together. You know, we've done it before. Let's do it again. And the movie was so successful that you needed to have that more output of product. Just
talking helmets and
oh gosh, all of that,
all that stuff, right?
Turn my head away from the microphone just to look at like the bumpin' battlers, cyber stompers. Gosh, so many of that stuff. You know.
So you know, if you're really building a brand, you don't just wait for success and then go, oh, how do we react? You're assuming a certain amount of success and putting pieces in place to keep prodding and testing. You know, maybe alternators would have lasted 4 waves instead of 8, you know, but we tested it and it worked out. So we kept going with it. You know, those things could have come in and out. There was no guarantee a Masterpiece line would have came out of the 20th anniversary Optimus.
Oh, hell no.
In the same way that, hey, can we make our own transforming products? And we did those dinosaurs, and we kind of decided, I don't know if we want to do that again. We could do other things well, you know, but we had to test that and kind of kick the tires. Otherwise, you're not preparing your business for the future, you know, one way or the other.
And it's something where these 2 items, unique as they are also very historical elements of Hasbro really kind of doing their own thing with the Transformers brand and preparing for one day that is going to be that big boom in the future with the Michael Bay movies between like 2007 to about, I'd say 2011. Yeah. That was like the boom period.
And to be fair, you know, Takara at this time, it wasn't Tomy yet, you know, was a certain size business. The Japan market was a certain size business. Beyblade was huge for them at this point. They didn't have the interest or the capacity to make Hasbro's brand bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So we did have to own our own part of the franchise in order to make sure that whatever Hasbro's market number goals were could be fulfilled. You can't, you know, I don't want to talk negatively, but we couldn't be dragged by Takara's limitations, right? And that's not a negative on them, but they were a smaller company, right?
And on the flip side, in all honesty, they wouldn't want to, you know, there is a partnership there.
Yeah, they don't want to just be told what to do. Yeah.
Well, especially they're not going to develop a product that's not going to be released in their region. You know, to spend time often. And resources. Yeah.
So,
most
stuff
you guys have developed has also found onto their shelves. These 2 didn't, you know. So.
Yeah. So that's why these 2 stand out to me a little bit as we were trying to develop the background kind of planning as a franchise as to what can we do, where should we do it, how do we do it. You know, if Takara doesn't want to do something, then what? You know, so it's all very interesting to me to just think about this again because the monster that was Hasbro's global need just kept getting bigger, and that's how we've talked about the universe segment, and we've talked about all these other little segments, and then the movie hits, right? And these are the early days where Takara was still thinking they would develop everything, right? Because that's how it always had been. And we kept a modest line, and it could be done, you know. And as we just kept making more and more and more and more, these were the early days of everybody going, okay, how else can we do this, you know?
Well, it's something where like when we leave Energon, like you said, universe becomes a thing. And then you also have titaniums that is also going to start popping up later on. Yeah,
like the partnerships, the Marvel Star Wars. You know, how can we make money on Transformers? Where can we do that? How can we do that? Is Takara part of that deal, or is not or is it separate than the Takara deal? And different things come and go on that. But that's the era we're in. It's not only just making a great show in Energon and let's make the products, but it's strategic franchise thinking behind the scenes.
And growing something that was going to be a global phenomenon just in a few years after that. So it's the early seeds of that in a lot of ways. And it's very cool. And again, it's interesting how we could discuss that just through these two products, because these two products really represent what would have been the future for the Transformers brand from the Hasbro side of things in terms of its independence of creation without the relying too much on Takara for everything, which is important for the company to grow.
And I mean, we all due respect to Takara. They know the stuff inside and out. We were working them to death. We just kept adding items and adding segments and looking for more revenue, not more revenue, but more capacity out of the items that we wanted to make, and so, we just all had to explore every option, because it wasn't the 80s anymore. It wasn't even the 90s. This was something different. And then when we talk about the actual films, all hell breaks loose at that point.
Oh yeah, when we get to the films, I don't even know how we're going to tackle that. We're going to have to do that in small bites because there's just so much to cover. That's going to be fun when we do that. But that's the two that we were going to cover today, guys. We just wanted to cover the Energon Kicker with High Wire Combat class from Energon, and of course the Mega class Alpha Quintesson. Don't say Alpha Q too slowly. Great stuff otherwise. Thank you, Aaron, once again for educating us on all the awesomeness from these two items here.
No problem. Awesome to talk about.
Alrighty, and this is again the Toy Armada with Aaron Archer, and I am your co-host Protoman, and we will talk again more of some more product in the near future. Thanks again for listening. Check out our Patreon that we have for the Toy Armada. A lot of cool tiers there and stuff. It's in the clicky in the description below. So be sure to check that out too. And as always, we'll see you in the near future.